Hi, it's Gal Pastor. Every once in a while, I feel like I'm losing the plot. Do you, like me, get busy daily searching to identify God at work in your family or the larger circle of your loved ones? Do you get reflective, surveying the past, trying to determine where and how God was present and at work? I often probe my parents and the stories of their parents that were passed on to me in bits and pieces, and I look for faith, for signs of God's activity in generations prior. I remember the story my grandmother told of her father, who I never met. He was Bosnian of Italian ancestry, and she remembers him. That's her main memory of him, going about his daily life on the farm constantly without ceasing, according to her narrative, praying. Often she would hear him just whisper Our Father over and over again. But I think largely what I've received in terms of the family narratives often looks like a lump of mess to me. Depression, war, anger, alcoholism, abandonment, divorce, violence, abuse. Looking back at that bountiful family dysfunction that brought me to this moment arms me with intense confusion, makes me throw up my hands in the air and say, I'm losing the plot here. And then I now have to go and raise my kids wisely and with hope that they will thrive in God's plan in the next decade or two. I think we all tend to look desperately for God's work in the seeming chaos that we have inherited. As the story of your family and your life unfolds, are you able to practice Christian hope? I come to you not so much as a scholar or a pastor, but as a mom and a bit of a disillusioned grown-up today. I feel that I have been told too often that sure, we should hope for something better that is coming in the distant future, the eschatological hope. But I need good news today for my lifetime, for my kids' lifetime. I need hope now. Or I've been handed down an even worse gospel, bad news really. False, 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 false. If you can master up lots of faith, you can then manifest some blessings and prosperity here and now. That's your hope for today, in yourself, in your ability to believe. That's the false gospel. So I was hitting dead end with these learned answers, superficial platitudes I received and somehow internalized. I needed a fresh view. What I need is a new framework for deeper understanding of what I can expect and when in terms of God's purposes and plans. Where do I go to figure out how to hope even in the midst of my present messy narrative? Well, I go to the Bible, but today I will not go to it alone because sometimes I need help to untangle it. I'm going hand in hand today with one of the best biblical scholars of our age. I'll let him show me what he knows. Walter Brueggemann is a renowned Old Testament scholar, and when an accomplished biblical scholar is also a poet, you know you got something good there. He has published more than 100 books and articles together, I would say, but don't worry, today I pulled the smallest one out for us, and it's called Hope Within History. It's a collection of his 4 different talks, but I'll be mostly mining the intro for us. Is there a better medicine for the soul than sound biblical theology in a beautifully curated language? And all this in this tiny book. And this is his thesis. The Bible gives us a clear model that history and hope coexist. So this is the blueprint that I think will lift you up today out of your discouraged flux. Hope is biblical, and it enters history. It interrupts historical patterns and narratives. It lives here among us, settles here. Now, this will be a bit involved, but I promise worthwhile stroll, and he'll hold your hand throughout. Brueggemann says that the juxtaposition of hope and history articulates a central claim and a central problem of biblical faith. There is no doubt that the Bible narrates a genuine history of humanity, with the reality of pain and amazement of death and life. There is no doubt also that the Bible narrates the powerful, hope-filled purposes of God, which seem to operate and be visible in the processes of historical interaction. Let's get some definitions out of the way. What does he mean by history? By using the word history, he simply means the concrete interactions among persons, communities, and states, countries, which partake of hurt and healing. Another way to describe history is to say narrative events and narrated events, like the one I received about my great-grandfather. By hope, Brueggemann means the resilient conviction that the processes of historical interaction are to be understood in relation to some overriding purpose that prevails in odd but uncompromising ways. Such a conviction of a prevailing purpose is expressed as plan in some of the most eloquent affirmations of biblical texts. Jeremiah 29 comes to mind. For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans for welfare and not evil, to give you a future and a hope. I will say before we delve further into Brueggemann that he says that both historical process and hope are essentially inscrutable. Neither can be fully known. That's not bad news, really. It's just acknowledging that there is more to both than what we can discern. The historical process is largely hidden, as it consists of a lot of elements that we simply cannot uncover. No history that is handed to us is complete. That was not all that was about my great-grandfather's life. There was more to him than what was handed to me, but it is inscrutable. God's hope in history is inscrutable too, because a good chunk of it is a supernatural mystery, right? So yes, both are inscrutable, but we can still roll up our sleeves and figure out what is known of both to us through biblical texts. Brueggemann says that the problem is how to speak both with seriousness of the reality of human experience and the buoyancy of these overriding claims which seem to preempt experience. The temptation among us, he says, is to split hope and history. My own image is these two parallel lines that never touch in this world. In this scenario, hope is just an elusive emotion floating above the blood-drenched, fleshly, messy narrative. What I need is to grab a hold of that biblical hope a bit more tightly. Are you with me? What happens when we split hope from history? Asks Brueggemann. As a result, we hold to a religious hope that is detached from the realities of the historical process. Or we participate in a history which ends in despair because the process itself delivers no lasting victories for the participants. Obviously, such a split, which yields both a historyless hope and a hopeless history, is a betrayal of biblical faith. It is precisely, he says, the wonder and burden of biblical texts that hope is relentlessly historical and history is cunningly hope-filled. Do you feel this tension in your life? As he goes on, his view is larger, broader, societal, and not really privatized, as he calls it. But I am appropriating his thesis to a more narrow history, yours and mine, our families. I think the principle holds, and I hope he doesn't mind me using his scholarly work for pastoral purposes. So let's enter Brueggemann's home turf, the Old Testament, for a fresh view of hope within history. He claims that the Jewish Bible, the Christian Old Testament, is fundamentally a literature of hope. Yet, at least in Christian circles, the Old Testament has such a caricatured reputation as a tradition of law, judgment, and wrath. So he gives us this fresh look at the Old Testament. It's a story of hope. And as a side question, do you need a fresh look at the unfolding of your narrative? Is it possible that some mischaracterizations prevail, caricatured reports? Could your family story also contain narratives of peoples who hoped and received what they hoped for in the Lord? The Genesis narrative, continues Brueggemann, about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, is essentially narrative of hope. Israel is portrayed as a people who sometimes doubt and resist this wonder of God. But on the whole, Israel in these narratives is ready to receive the word, trust the promise, and act in hope. Brueggemann then goes on to dissect Jeremiah, and he proposes that in this prophet, we can find these 5 elements that coexist in the narrative of hope in the Old Testament. So here's your kind of like an ingredients checklist, sort of the ABCs of biblical hope. First, in Jeremiah, we see a profound sense of anguish, pathos, and incongruity that touches him personally. Check. Then, second, confidence in the moral coherence of the world. Now, this one is a bit tough because we often look at the world and say it's anything but morally cohesive. And so this needs just a bit of unpacking. Jeremiah believes passionately that there is a fiber of justice and righteousness that persists in the historical process always. Number 3, there is an assertion of the raw sovereignty of God in the historical process. 4, there is a capacity in Jeremiah for discerning social analysis and criticism. He is looking around himself, interpreting his world, constantly discerning. 5, this is your 5th ingredient, bold conviction about an alternative possibility that goes under the name of hope. How did you do with this checklist? What can we glean from his claim or assertion that hope is written all over the history of the Old Testament? I propose you internalize a phrase that Brueggemann borrows from Herbert Schneidow from his book entitled Sacred Discontent. Israel has a chronic discontent with the present. It is endlessly suspicious and refuses to accept the orders of the day. Schneidow labels this discontent sacred because it comes from God. This sacred discontent is rooted in hope. The hope is in the overriding power of God to work a new will against the order of the day. It is the act of hope which holds the present critically and loosely. Israel knows in all these texts that the purpose of God finally will move against the way things are. This stuff preaches. What is the function of hope? Why is hope practiced? What happens when a people hopes? Brueggemann. The answer I make is, hope keeps the present arrangement open and provisional. Hope reminds us that the way things are and all the extrapolations we make from that is precarious and in jeopardy. Hope reminds us not to absolutize the present, not to take it too seriously, not to treat it too honorably, because it will not last. Receive the balm of sound biblical scholarship. Do you see the good news? And sometimes the good news is mostly in some fresh verbiage. I'm here for it. But I'm not giving you this just because it is beautifully put, although I admire it so. The value of this is not just in its words, but in the concept, in the framework. He tells us it is entirely biblical to hope for this and now, as much as it is for that and then. Hope within history, not without, not after, not at the end of yours or the world's. It is precisely the wonder and burden of biblical texts that hope is relentlessly historical and history is cunningly hope-filled. That's the sentence I love. So go on, live and hope in the uncomfortable place of your sacred discontent.